There are today two distinct and prevailing types of pianoforte. These are the upright and the grand. Of the once popular square, it is unnecessary here to do more than say that the type has passed into a state of obsolescence and is fast dying out. Both structurally and tonally, it was most effective, and its popularity was due rather to the imperfect development of the other types during the period of its vogue than to any inherent advantages of its own. It has well and faithfully served its appointed time, and we may properly leave it to die in peace. These, in my opinion, are quite strong words from a book from 1906, Theory and Practice of Piano Construction by William B. White. This is a 1970s reprint, but the book is in its original state inside. And I find those to be very strong words, again from 1906, where the square grand, the square piano, had only recently fallen out of fashion. They were still being made in the 1880s, the 1890s. It was hardly even a decade after, before this book was published that the square pianos had fallen out of fashion. And I find it to be wild that just 10 or 20 years after people had decided, oh, the square grand is irrelevant, it's gone. That would be like a modern piano maker making an instrument 10 years ago and everyone says, nope, it's terrible, it's garbage, throw it away, burn it on a funeral pyre, dig a hole for it and just bury it 6 feet under. It's wild to me how much people hate the square piano. They detest it almost. It's quite amusing. The square piano that we're about to go visit inside of Duke's Lexington Antique Center here in Virginia is, by all means, beautiful. It's made of this elaborate, gorgeous wood. I believe it to be rosewood. I could be wrong, but whatever the veneer and the finish on this piano is, it's magnificent. Enough talking about it. Let's go take a look at it. I have always loved the strange and unusual pianos, but recently my brain has become fixated on the world of the square piano. Everyone knows the upright piano, and most people are familiar with grand pianos, but there is a third type of piano that most people don't know very much about, and that is the square piano. What on earth is this? Why did people decide we need a rectangular-shaped piano? Because it is all original from the 1870s. The lyre, which is the thing your pedals are attached to, is disconnected, and I think parts of it underneath might be broken. So although this can all be fixed and repaired by somebody who knows what they're doing, I'm not that person. I can't do that right now, so we will have to play the piano without any pedal. It'll be a little interesting. The interpretations of my music will be a little different than usual. To properly understand why the square piano even exists, let's go back to the very beginning of the history of the piano. This will be a very brief history. Before the piano, we had two different types of stringed keyboard instruments. There was the clavichord, a small box-shaped instrument that was very good for intimate venues, filling the parlor, for example, with music. It was inadequate for anything larger than a small room. It did not have very much volume and projection. We also had the harpsichord, which took several forms, but its most famous form was that of a very similar shape to our modern grand piano. It had that harp shape with the long side and the short curved side. You see a harpsichord, you know what you're looking at. The harpsichord was much better for filling concert venues as it had a much louder sound, but the thing the harpsichord couldn't do that even the clavichord could was touch sensitivity. You couldn't play one note quiet and the same note loud. It just physically is incapable of doing that. Over the years, people added courses and different manuals to the harpsichord to give it some level of dynamics, but still, that individual touch response was just simply not there. So in the early 1700s, people decided that the harpsichord needed to change, and they experimented with ways of creating a touch-sensitive harpsichord. In the early 1700s, an Italian inventor, Cristofori, was the first one to create this, and he invented what they called the gravicembalo col piano e forte, essentially harpsichord with loud and soft. Over the years, this eventually became known as a different instrument. It was not a harpsichord, but it was the piano. He did this by essentially taking a harpsichord and installing a different mechanism inside. Instead of a plucking mechanism, he had a striking mechanism. It was much simpler to the pianos we have today, but you had the key, and then you had a hammer that would go up and strike the string and bounce off of it. That is, in essence, the simplest form of a piano. So over time, this instrument went from being a harpsichord that did loud and soft to being its own instrument. It developed its own sound. It became its own thing by adapting a hammer mechanism to a harpsichord. Around the same time, it was a few years later, but during this same era, people attempted to do the same thing to the clavichord, which was a little box-shaped instrument. A different inventor by the name of Zumpe, he took the clavichord and designed his own hammer mechanism to go into the clavichord, and this was the beginnings of the square piano. Early square pianos were very small and delicate and light instruments. They bore much resemblance to the clavichords that they came from, very similar to the earliest pianos, looking and sounding very much like the harpsichords that they were derived from. Over the years, however, the square piano became bigger and larger and more beefy and more hefty to compete with the growing popularity of upright pianos and grand pianos, until it became what we have here. No longer a small, elegant, and dainty instrument, but this big, hulking beast of a piano. It's massive. This has all 88 keys. This was an invention, I believe, originally created by Mathushek in the mid-1850s, where he devised what they called the spread scale, but he invented a way to fit the 88 keys of a traditional piano at the time into a square grand. Steinway made several of these. The square was developed in the United States until the American product left all imitators and rivals far behind. But even in that, the fundamental defects of construction could never be overcome entirely. The great gap in the middle of the structure, required for the passage of the hammers, entails dangerous weakness, against which no reasonable weight of iron bracing has ever seemed to prevail. Moreover, the development of the grand type led to rivalry among those makers who confined themselves chiefly to the square, with the result that the latter was made more and more heavy and cumbrous in an effort to catch up with the fundamental advantage which the grand pianoforte possessed on account of its superior design. Besides, the square was never a thing of beauty, and its increasing size was by no means an advantage in this respect, so that when the rapidly growing population of the great American cities began to make living room continually more valuable, the claims of the small, powerful, elegant, and moderate-priced upright soon were successfully asserted. When Steinway first started making square pianos, they were one of the first to make these big, giant, hulking instruments because they wanted to make the best square piano. They marketed their squares as square grands because they felt that their tone quality of their square pianos was equal, if not better, to the grand pianos of the day. And many would certainly dispute this. Steinway, however, did not. They felt their squares were best, and it meant that pretty much everybody else and their mother would begin to make very similar square pianos. Charles Stieff, they're often quoted as being the poor man Steinway. Their pianos were of such good quality, some say they were even better than Steinway at the time, which is entirely believable. There was a very close, tight race. They called them the Piano Wars in the 1850s and 60s, where all the great makers of the time, Steinway, Chickering, Weber, all these different people would come together and fight over who had the best piano. They would exhibit at the international world fairs and things, and they'd fight over who had the best piano, and they'd slander each other in the newspapers. It was a great time. So these 88-key beasts of pianos gained popularity originally because they were small and compact and affordable. But over time, they weren't that anymore. This piano is anything but small and compact. A small grand piano takes up almost as much space as this does, a little bit less this way, but the length of like a 6-foot piano is basically equivalent. It takes up almost as much floor space. And many would say that a small grand piano arguably has a much better tone and would play much better than an old square piano like this. And even as far as 100 years ago, people were claiming that the square piano is obsolescent. They were burning them in funeral pyres. Because the piano manufacturers got together and said, hey, the square piano, it's an end of an era. We can burn them all. We're building uprights and grands. And since the dawn of upright pianos and the dawn of grand pianos becoming so much better than squares, everyone has basically said, throw away your square pianos. We do not need them anymore. And there is some level of truth to this, but I honestly feel that some of the hatred on square pianos is a little bit too harsh, in my opinion. And again, this is coming from somebody who loves the oddball, who loves the weird, and who loves the unusual. So in a way, it's very wonderful that we just find these old pianos abandoned in places for anyone to admire and to look at, even though some people just really seem to hate square pianos. What is there to hate? Well, we have to realize that the square piano is a completely different lineage from the upright piano and from the grand piano. It is not the same thing. One common complaint that I hear about square pianos is that the action feels like garbage, that the internal mechanism of the piano just feels horrible. And there's some good reason for this. Again, the fact that the bass keys, where the strength of the blow and the leverage of the action need to be greatest, were the shortest of all, while the extreme treble keys were longest, always tended to destroy the touch proportions and entailed much counterbalancing and other operations which were, however, but makeshifts at the best. The scale design of the square piano is very strange. Your highest keys have to reach the highest strings, which are up here, generally, roughly. I can't open the lid to show you exactly where they are, unfortunately. But your highest keys are very long, and your lowest keys are very short. I've seen some where they're only like this long because your bass strings, where the hammer strikes, is like right here. So your key only has to be this long, whereas up here your key has to be longer. And many people say that this results in just a horrible feeling action. This piano is from the 1870s. It is all original. It has not been altered aside from the finish in any way on the inside. And it's still playable. It still feels quite adequate. The weight of the keys up here in the treble, which of course sound horrible because they're out of tune, but the weight of the keys and the feel of the action up here is not any worse than the feel of it down here. It's relatively well balanced. If anything, the keys up here are lighter than the keys down here, something you'll still find in modern pianos because the bass hammers are bigger than up in the treble. It should be mentioned that the makers of square pianos were never able to apply to it a mechanism having the elasticity and rapid repetition that belonged to the Erard Grand action, or the tape check device of Wernham, which is universal in the upright. There's a few other understandable reasons why people dislike the square piano. One of those is that tuners and technicians detest them. Because of this magnificent boat on top, I can't open up the lid of the piano to show you, but the tuning pins for most square pianos, they're back here. So to tune the piano, you have to spend several hours reaching across the entire instrument to tune all of the strings. And for one or two notes, that doesn't sound bad at all, but for all 88 keys of a grand square piano like this, it does not sound very fun. Additionally, a lot of these old square pianos use a different type of tuning pin. They have a different size that's not compatible with modern tuning hammers. You have to have special equipment just to tune these, which in itself is kind of crazy and also just interesting to me. I love that. I don't know, it's just so interesting to me. So that's another valid reason why somebody would dislike to work on the square pianos. The chief reasons for the gradual decline in the popularity of the square may be traced almost as much to social and economic as to artistic and mechanical causes, although these latter had the greater influence in shaping the ultimate destiny of the type. I think the final reason that so many people dislike square pianos is because it takes somebody with a bit of imagination to listen to an out-of-tune piano, and also might take somebody with a little bit of experience of hearing pianos to understand that no, at its core, this is a good piano. With a grain of salt, it is a square, right? It is different from a grand, it is different from an upright. It is different, it will not be the same. But to me, playing this all-original piano, where every single key works, that's pretty big for a square piano. Where some of the notes that are somewhat in tune, don't sound half bad to me. Despite having 3 soundboard cracks, those notes have good sustain. They're not up in the very high treble, but they have good sustain, they have decent tone. And I think it would just take somebody with a little bit of imagination and understanding of what pianos are to look at an out-of-tune piano and go, no, this has potential. Granted, there are many issues that an out-of-tune piano can have that we have no idea about. The pin block might be completely gone, and it might need a completely new pin block, which would be expensive, but it can be doable. It is in relatively good shape for an instrument that is well over 100 years old. It is quite old, and it could, in theory, be restored to full, original, new condition if somebody were to take the time and the money to do so. And that's kind of the big issue, is the money. It takes like $50,000 to $60,000 to fully restore one of these instruments. That would be including the refinishing. I think it would be a bit less if you didn't have to refinish it, which you don't. They did a marvelous job here. Because many people tend to think of pianos as being these financial objects and these investments, which they are very much not. A piano is very much not an investment. People tend to just throw away these instruments. And it's a pity that so many people throw away and dispose of these old pianos, even though, because they are real instruments made of wood and metal, they can be rebuilt, they can be refurbished, and they can sing once again. I personally believe that there will be, someday, a square piano renaissance. We will, in maybe 40, maybe 50, maybe less than that, maybe fewer years from now. But someday we will go and look and say, wow, I want to play 1860s music on a piano that is period appropriate to the 1860s. And all of those pianos will be inaccessible in private collections or in museums. Nobody will have them. They won't be available for anyone to come and find like we have here. I'm very thankful for the people who took the time to refinish this piano and to keep it in the store for as long as they have. In view of all these disadvantages, it is no longer a matter for wonderment that the upright pianoforte succeeded the square as a bidder for domestic favor, while the larger and more highly evolved grand remained the choice of professional musicians. Square pianos do not come from the same lineage as a grand piano. It makes sense that it would sound different and that it would play different. And people need to kind of understand that this is not the same thing. Yes, Steinway wanted us to think this in the 1860s, but realistically it is not the same as a grand piano, and is certainly not the same as an upright piano. It will have different playing characteristics. It is going to sound different. It evolved from the clavichord, an instrument from like the 1500s. Like, obviously it's going to have a different playing characteristic than any other piano. And that's what makes them cool. Most likely, an instrument like this will never be made again. And that in itself is neat, to look into the past and say, what were the people of the 1860s and the 1870s, what were they playing? This is what they were playing. And yes, grand pianos existed and uprights existed as well, to some varying levels of success. But the square pianos and the grand pianos were really the dominant instruments at the time. The square piano didn't fall into obscurity until the upright piano became good enough in the late 1800s to really warrant that. There were lots of difficulties in the early days of getting the upright actions to work, of getting the upright pianos to even sound good. I just find square pianos to be such a very interesting part of piano history, and yet they are forgotten and abandoned. Like, it genuinely is just really fun to play. Some of these are quite strong words from this book from 1906. And I disagree with some of them. There's the one passage where he says, "The square was never a thing of beauty." And this, among everything else, I dispute the heaviest. The hand carvings on the music rest, on the sides of the piano, on the legs, it was all done by hand. It's magnificently beautiful. And to say that a square piano is not a thing of beauty, I think is almost a crime to the people who built that piano. It's almost a travesty to the master craftsman who built that instrument 150 years ago. I think what the author of this book means is that square pianos were once delicate and light, and they were once small instruments. And over the years, they became these large, hulking, magnificent beasts with 88 keys, and they were huge. They were colossal. And I think that's what the author means when he says that they were no longer a thing of beauty. To me, I think the grandness of this square piano is what makes it beautiful. The elegant carvings, the beautiful wood. It's magnificent. When this piano was new, it was of the utmost quality. It was likely one of the finest and most expensive pianos that money could buy at the time. And that, I think, is why it has survived as long as it has. It has stood the test of time, and the quality of its craftsmanship with this beautiful wood and the magnificent carvings are part of why it has been saved. The owner of the store did not have the heart to throw it away like he had with several other pianos in the past. Something was special about this one. Something is special about this piano, and it could be saved by somebody. This instrument is for sale. Somebody out there could buy it, restore it to its former glory, and it would live for another century and a half. And that's the magical thing about pianos, whether they be uprights, grand, or even squares. If they're well cared for, they can be replaced, repaired, rebuilt, and they can live another generation, which is magical to me. Hopefully you've enjoyed this interesting video of exploring and learning about the history and the value of these old square grand pianos. The pianos that were made 150 years ago are quite unlike the pianos that are made today, and a piano like that will never be made again. Thank you very much to Duke of Duke's Lexington Antique Center for allowing me to come film some videos about the wonderful piano that is preserved in this store. I think preserved is a good way to put it. It is not refurbished, but it is not actively declining in a horrible way. It is saved for now. And I hope that somebody, someday, will buy this instrument and restore it to its former glory. Personally, I think it deserves that. Thank you very much as well to viewers like you who make these videos possible. I couldn't do it without you. With your continued support, perhaps I would be able to save some intros like this myself and do cool things with them. But only time will tell. I would love to be able to foster a community of passionate piano enjoyers such as myself. For now, thank you very much for subscribing. If you liked this video, leave a comment down below on your opinions of square pianos, whether you like them or hate them. Please let me know. I would love to discuss in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and hopefully I'll find some more interesting pianos to make videos of. In fact, let's go see if we can find some more. I'll see you in another video. The piano goes in the square hole.
This is a
Piano.
Can you guess which spot that goes in? That's right, it goes in the square hole.